Welcome to Anther Dish, the show about food, culture, and identity. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Dugnan. Welcome back to the second half of Season 10. I hope your new year is starting out restful and filled with lots of warmth wherever you're tuning in from. To kickstart the second half of the season, we're shifting to a topic that I tend to feel a little intimidated by, wine. But as my guest Cha McCoy puts it this week, there is a lot to unpack in terms of why so many people feel intimidated by it or feel like they can't access it. Cha is an entrepreneur, educator, and event producer. As a certified sommelier, she developed the Communion, which is a wine dinner series that offers an inviting, accessible approach to gathering and enjoying wine. This experience inspired her to open her first brick-and-mortar store, the Communion Wine and Spirits. Her dinner series was profiled in Food and Wine, and Cha was named as one of Wine Enthusiast's 40 Under 40. Cha has worked as Cherry Bomb's first beverage director, the head of beverage at Charleston's Wine and Food Festival, and as a sommelier at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Portugal, as well as an adjunct professor at her alma mater, Syracuse University, where she served as an adjunct professor. You can find Cha in Harlem, New York, or on one of her international adventures. Today, Cha speaks with me about her new book, Wine Pairing for the People, the communion of wine, food, and culture from Africa and beyond. This book is unique in how it approaches the concepts of terroir and the pairing ideology of what grows together goes together. In Cha's expansion of wine pairings, traditional foods and cuisines from Africa, Asia, and the Americas are given pairings of wines that celebrate heat, tang, and spice. In today's conversation, Cha shares her refreshing approach for terroir for regions of the world that aren't known for their grape wines and describes how certain taste preferences are shaped, as well as what flavors are valued or looked over under colonial approaches to wine pairings. I learned so much from Cha in this conversation, and I'm very excited for you to hear it. Here's my conversation with Cha. Welcome to the show, Cha. How are you doing today?
A little stuffy, but, we got to bear the cold, right? Us Northerners. But thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining me, especially as you're sick. I respect that a lot. Do you mind sharing a little bit of background about who you are, where you're coming in from today, and the type of work that you do?
Yes. So I am a certified sommelier with the Court of the Masters. I am also an entrepreneur, or more specifically, beverage entrepreneur. I also am in academics. I would say I am education adjacent. I do wine trainings and also taught as the adjunct professor for the wine classes at Syracuse University. I was very much part of the master's program in business schools, working with some of the students there who were competing for. We have a business competition at Syracuse University as well. So being anybody that was kind of like food or wine or food and beverage adjacent with their projects, I also mentored some of the students there. And I was doing that for fun. So I just love being
Awesome.
able to get people the resources and connections when I can. Yeah, I guess I should also say now an author.
Yes, congratulations. I'm really excited to chat with you about some of the themes in your book and your work more broadly, because I find as I was reading it, I didn't grow up with any knowledge of wine, and I find it a very intimidating subject, and your book is very accessible, and it's the first time where I felt like I was able to start to understand these concepts that were so daunting. So can you speak to how this kind of came to be and how you started to identify the particular barriers or intimidations that people faced in accessing wine?
Yeah. Well, first, as I'm sure the episode is titled, the book is named Wine Pairing for the People. I thought that just my entry into wine, very similar, was not connected. Yeah, I didn't grow up, my background drinking wine. I didn't watch my family drink any, like I say, wine pairings. I do now have more recollection of my family always enjoying some good champagne now. So clearly I need to stop saying they didn't have wine growing up. They was like, hold on. We loved our Moet. I was like, of course, yes, I'm sorry. So yeah, they enjoyed a good bottle of champagne for celebrations, etc. But they never was sitting down having it at the dinner table, I should say. So it was foreign for me as well. The book, I guess there's two parts. I'm happy that you felt connected and still receive that from the book, as in the goal was not so much to teach people about wine. There are actual beginner wine books for people who want to understand that, but more so to open the door. Well, let's give you another perspective. The way I was trained and the different schools that are out there about wine, it really does not start or talk about a lot of the countries that I focused on in the book. And so instead of being like, "Oh, okay, you left all us out, all these other regions out," particularly, as you know, is gonna be wine regions where people either black or brown who are either the winemakers or winery owners. And so there's like, oh, it's kind of interesting. We don't learn so much about these regions, but there's just it happened to be where a lot more, let's say, diversity is at, in different positions. So I was okay. Well, I didn't want it to be the alternative to your other wine book. It was more or less, well, let's talk about it from a different perspective. And that's why food and travel, as you saw in the book, was my way of being able to uplift the wine regions that I did speak about and to include cuisines that were often left out when we are talking about pairings and when is a good time to have, you know, wine. If no one thought, I love fried chicken, I think like the next person. But if no one said, "Oh, wine pairing is, should go with this dish," then you were like, "Oh, why would I have wine with my jerk chicken, right? Or my fried chicken?" Or if no one thought that this was something I guess we see things as acceptable or permission when we're in restaurants and we see a psalm is at that particular restaurant. That is like a micro, way of being able to see that, oh, this is where wine is supposed to be in this setting, or with this food. So I did recognize that in different cultures, those restaurants, when you're at your Indian restaurant, a Jamaican restaurant, you don't really see Psalms walking around. It's like, oh, do you want to see the wine
Right.
list? And so maybe that's how can I do that? Or how can this book challenge the idea that everyone's food deserve wine too? And then if you feel any more interested in your case, Sarah, you could then take the next, wine course or your next wine book that will literally allow you to learn more about wine. But I guess I just wanted to at least clear it up that I don't want anybody to think that I'm trying to teach people about wine from the perspective that you're gonna understand how to taste everything from this book.
Yeah,
I guess
right.
I wanted to get people who don't usually drink wine like yourself or who didn't grow up with it, permission to feel like we could have wine with our everyday food, whether it's your culture or not. I know you're in Canada, so I'm sure there's plenty of Caribbean, cuisine near
Yes,
you, and
totally.
you could think of wine to go with the pairings too. So maybe that's the best way to start first. Is just kind of exploring.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's the thing. Like so I took my husband out for his birthday dinner a couple weeks ago, and it was at a barbecue place, and we both were like, "Oh, we just like it's always beer, and it's so heavy when you're eating barbecue, and it doesn't always like make logical sense to continue drinking that." So I'm curious in terms of, your approach to the book, if you can speak a little bit to how flavors become valued, be it in the wine itself or the dishes that they're paired with.
Yeah, I think that was what I was trying to, that's the attempt I'm making is that from history, our palate, and if we want to go into, some theories here, right? The theory of taste from Pierre Bourdieu, how do one either have their preferred taste, whether in this case, let's speak about wine or beer. Usually that's cultural connected, right? If you're in a region or an area where there's a lot more beer either being made and or enjoyed, that would be your personal preference, but it was also informed maybe until that guest, drinker, etc., travels and be able to learn a little bit more. I feel like that is more genuine when it's influenced by, "Oh, I want to be perceived as more sophisticated," or these wines will make a difference between who's who in the room, right? If you are able to talk fluently about French wine,
Hmm.
but maybe know more about wine from, I don't know, Canada and upstate New York, the Finger Lakes and Niagara Escarpment is another region where they're making wine upstate as well. I think there is something about how the preference, some people, even with me owning a wine shop in upstate, wouldn't even care to even taste the wine from the area if they had a choice between the two. It's already gonna be this perceived notion that the French wine is going to be better. They haven't even tried it.
Yeah.
And I also saw there was a preference in flavor, even though their palate didn't like it. So even somebody would say, "Oh, I don't like dry wine." But if you tell them this is a, great wine, you tell them all the bells and whistles about the vintage and the terroir, and somehow they begin to be persuaded with the information. but it's because they understand that they wanna appear, especially if they're gonna be drinking amongst friends, giving it as a gift to in-laws. I've seen that happen. They're like, I don't know anything about wine, but what's
Yeah.
fancy here?" And I'm like, "Oh, what do they like rosé? Do they like sparkling? Do they want
Yeah.
oh, which one is the most expensive? I just wanna, I'm trying to show off to my boss, so I wanna," and I'm like, "Oh, well, that's not really how people enjoy wine." But I guess the idea is that they don't care, they wanna be perceived as someone who seems knowledgeable, and so now our palate has been tainted. Our palate has been on a, again, back to the theory of taste here. There's a preference for Western European wines, especially as us being on the East Coast versus drinkers that I know who are from the West Coast. They're more supportive of Californian wine, and the wine lists are more California focused. And I feel like we're right here in New York, and I feel like we still will have more European wines on our list than we would see New York wine or even East Coast wines in general. So that's something that I feel like, in understanding everyone's appetite for the other or foreign, it has been more of a mental, I'm doing the work as a sommelier trying to get them to like, hey, you could trust your palate. If you like things that sweet, I'm not gonna judge you. I'm gonna give you the best wine that we have. If you like, something that's maybe more fruity, or if you actually do like rosé, but you don't want your friends to know for the men in the room.
Yeah, fair.
It's so much more context I recognize in the when people are shopping for wine. It's not so much that they're overwhelmed. They're like going through all this in their head when they just selected, I don't know, a bottle for $25. I'm like, it's for you to enjoy. Let's just unmask like all of the all the preconceived notions that you are going, that one bottle is going to be an effect of how everyone's going to see you. Um, and I do understand the pressure as well, because that's what the environment we have created, for people as well.
That's so interesting because, as you're saying that, it makes me really think about how that notion of like haute cuisine continues, especially for America, Canada, as places that were colonized by this like European group of nations, that's sort of maintaining in a lot of like the dominant conversations around what flavors get valued and what palates tend to be, whether or not it's actually true to like the person's preferences, as you said.
Yeah, I agree.
I wanted to talk a bit about your flavor wheel because I know that you built that out yourself. So can you talk a little bit about the research process that went into developing that to build out like those categories and those distinct groups?
Yeah, I mean, not the first one to use flavor wheels. I feel like Wine Folly is a good intro wine book. So, as much as I want people to celebrate my book, I feel like when you're ready to deep dive and actually learn more about the different varietals, I guess I would definitely say her book is a good one for, I guess, even my students and my staff. I would always tell them to go there. She has a flavor wheel concept that it's not in a book, but really or maybe it is, but she definitely has like a physical flavor wheel.
Mm,
And as someone, my actual background is in civil engineering, and
yeah.
I've done a lot of projects in interior design, and we use like how we have the flavor wheel, they have like the color wheel, like for interior designers. Like if they try to find contrasting colors, the orange with the blues and what shades and what works there. So I'm familiar with this color wheel that you would see in that spectrum. And I was like, okay, we definitely need to include this because as I'm talking to wine drinkers, especially if they're not trade, one of the main things they're are so concerned with is I don't know any of the wine words. And I'm like, apple. I don't that's not that's not a
Yeah.
is I'm sure have you had one? I've had strawberry, cinnamon. These are all things that are not wine words. However, the intimidation I recognized was real. They still would not want they don't get it, they don't taste it in the wine. And so I wanted to be a sense of reflection. Like if you are tasting the wine, instead of just reading my tasting notes that I put for the pairings, I did want there to be some moment of like you can flip back to the intro to the flavor wheel yourself when you buy a bottle and being able to like, oh yeah, I can see how she got orange zest, and all the other potpourri or rose in this. I can see that now, so maybe you're not thinking about it when you also maybe pick up some new ones for yourself. So that was important for me to at least include in the book to give people like this is not the end all be all. And I don't know how much I actually spoke about the flavor wheel, but I see in my conversations during my book talk it has come up a few times. But the flavor wheel was developed from me reviewing actually my own tasting notes and seeing some of the vocabulary that I personally use often. So I almost like so it's not the end. It's not all of the words that you can possibly get in all, in wine. So I guess that's my disclaimer there. Like, oh, I don't see I got something and I don't see it on here. That's totally up to you. And I also want everybody to feel like you should use things that are in your own culture, and things that you're familiar with. And growing up in New York City, where my neighbor and some of my classmates and friends grew up in Hispanic culture, I know what sazon tastes like in sofrito and these other spices and sauces. So for me to be able to say, I can actually get that sazon package, I can taste this blend here a little, it's giving adobo when I'm
Yeah.
tasting it, where somebody, maybe that's not something they would be able to, connect with as much. West African dishes, soya, from Nigeria, et cetera, different spices that you will get. But I think that I wanted everyone to have permission. That's why I threw, of course, everyone knows apple, but I threw a few in there that was more I'm more culturally connected to because that's what I had access to in flavors that I was aware of growing up. And so therefore I'm almost giving everybody else the permission to create your own flavor wheel and to include your own spices, seasonings, things that's in your own cabinet into it. So then when you actually pick up herbs like tarragon, etc., whether it's dried, fresh, etc., that's something that you can be able to find in wine where someone else may be, not aware. But you're not going for any exams, so we don't have to keep saying the same rhetoric that is being reproduced in the textbooks. We are just talking about wine amongst each other and enjoying it together. So in this case, this is a hall pass for us to be able to be our own, go on our own adventure and create our own, route for that.
Thank you for sharing that because I feel like that really speaks to your general approach in the book as well, where you're making these pairings that expand on the idea of, a traditional terroir. We've talked about terroir on the show a little bit, but not in depth in terms of its limitations and kind of restrictions as well.
Yeah, I feel like there is a lot to say about cultural terroir. So we are aware that terroir used in wine talks more about the land, the soil type, the weather, the climate, of that in that year. So this kind of sense of place in time. And that's the cool part about wine that it is captured in a bottle, but obviously it's not frozen in time because wine evolves in the bottle as well. So there is something about capturing 2022. And then so when you taste it, you're like,
Yeah.
oh, this, you can have that same grape 2 years later, vintage that was created 2 years later because it was a rainy year. Unfortunately, it doesn't taste as bright and as ripe as the other one, even though they both Chardonnays from the same region and actually produced from the same vine. So that is the part about terroir I think is important for all wine drinkers to first understand, because therefore they would not expect the same level of consistency in each bottle. Therefore, the big wine corporate brands who are almost mixing a wine all the time by adding additives because they're trying to meet a certain level of consistency, like, oh, we want our wine to be just like last year. Well, in my mind, because I'm definitely a terroir focused wine drinker and lover, that I would want it to reflect the sense of place and time. I don't want it to taste like wine from New Zealand if I'm getting the wine from France. And I don't want it to taste like 2022 when the vintage is 2024. So
Mm.
um,
Yeah.
I think that's the magic of wine, right? And so there's large brands and who focus more on it tasting the same every year. And that's just not my style. I would prefer it to be a lot more of the and this is particular to still wine versus sparkling. But I'll be open to sparkling wine that's more reflective of this. I just know that champagne they actually use more of a blend of different varietals and of different years to actually come up with the cuvee, which is the base wine for the sparkling. I would say there is an important part of making sure the culture of the winemakers, like not trying to say that Italy
Yeah.
is not good at making sparkling wine. Of course, there's Prosecco, there's Franciacorta, etc. But where it's being made and where it's known from almost makes sense from the point of celebration, etc., of where it's located. So I think that that's important for me too. Is more or less like the cultural terroir. In Italy, we know their love for tomatoes. We know their love for pizza, and so therefore, what they're eating and what they're drinking should go hand in hand. Versus in Rome, France, where they're having more, well, we're assuming, right, more beef bourguignon and, these russet
Yeah.
dishes, etc. So then the wine should go with that they create should pair with those types of foods. So I think that not understanding, like, should they have a wine that tastes more like tomatoes and sauce and goes well with that in that Rhone Valley? That's that's the part of cultural terroir that I'm trying to get at that makes sense as well. The sense of place also means the people, what they're already eating, what makes sense that the wine that the winemaker's creating is to go with the food that he's grown up with, that she's been enjoying, their whole lives. And so therefore their palate, going back to what we talked about earlier, is adjusted for those flavors. And so that makes it more genuine and natural as well. So a long way to get there, but I hope I hope you got that.
No, that was great. And I really I appreciate that you're putting the people back into the process of terroir because I feel like so often it's just talked about relative to landscape and climate and geography and not the cultural components that so deeply reflect like what ends up happening with wine. I'm thinking particularly around you have a piece where you're looking at South African wines and how those components come in with that. I found that particularly interesting in terms of placing it in time with politics and people and apartheid as well with that one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it's important for us to continue to connect. I feel like this book is for people who care about people.
Yeah.
That's one of the main things, one of the questions that somebody's just like, okay, so why this book? Why this way? I'm a traveler. And so now that I'm learning, my ethnographic research has been truly me being doing this type of field work as a wine first enthusiast to wine professional. I got into the industry from living in Italy and then continued to, that's where the wine bug bit me. And then when I moved back
Mm.
to the States, continuing to work in the industry in different ways, but more importantly, in the wine retail. And I wanted to make sure what I was picking up from the different places that I traveled to, South Africa, etc., as I got more, infatuated with the industry, more passionate about the winemakers that I was drinking from the store. And I would say, hey, I really love this wine. I want to know more about it. And yeah, I think I'm going to go visit. And my store owner was like, okay, I guess I can reach out to the distributor and let him know that you're coming, and that's how it started. And I went on a few trips. Chile is another one as well, because it's a wine that we sold in the store that I worked at. And of course, that helped me obviously come back and sell the wine more. You come back
Yeah,
from your
fair.
trip and you're like, hey, I just got back. I visited this place. You're gonna love it.
Yeah.
So so it makes me a good salesperson. But at the same time, that on the grounds conversation, I guess you want to say interviewing, research conversation with the winemaker and all the staff that also works there, being able to learn about, again, going back to South Africa, whether it's the difference between being Black Afrikaans and then white, in South Africa, and understand the complexities of that. It was from, as a New Yorker, and then going somewhere and like, a New York, I say a Black American going somewhere to understand that being Black South African means something different. Where in America, where it may literally be the color of your skin, no matter if you have the same complexion as me or lighter, everyone's gonna throw you in. I guess it's that 1% rule. You know, it's enough for
Yeah.
you to be kind of. No one's gonna make the difference between you. All of us are Black. Or at least that's how we are treated. Let's just say that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then you go there and then they're very intricate. Like, no, I'm not Black, I'm Afrikaans. And I'm like, I don't know what this means, so I'm taking the
Yeah.
time to understand what privilege that may have granted them, even in wine, whether you'll see more Afrikaans people as winery owners, but more Black people working in wine. Whether it's the harvest work, the hard labor work, who gets selected to go to the schools to study who moves on side. If we were looking at a website and we would say, oh, they got a bunch of, black wine makers and black wine winery owners, and maybe half the people we're looking at is not actually considered black, they're considered, Afrikaans. So we're looking just at the color of their skin, we don't know them, right? They're on a website of their winery. But I was like, oh, this is a lot more deeper, and I want to be able to learn more from them. And so that started a curiosity in me as well about how history plays a role in how we perceive, like, oh, who's actually getting the benefits? Is there reciprocity actually happening at this point in current day and age? And learning from the actual black winemakers what is possible, what could the future be? Is there limits to education? Is it because of funding and resources? For someone like the owner of Aslina, I spoke to her often. Didn't get a chance to meet her down there, but I met her while living in Portugal. She came and spoke at a wine conference there, and have had conversations with her virtually since. And yeah, it was very important for me to be able to uncover kind of what we may see as like, oh, South African wine is great here in New York. How come I don't see more of it? How
Yeah.
come, you don't hear about it? And maybe it has a lot more context because of the political history, is what I'm realizing. And so that's why it was so important for me to include that in the book as well. Because we don't, as a consumer, you're just like, oh, I guess French is best because I keep seeing French wine. But they didn't have the same barriers to entry into this market as Chile did, as South Africa did, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about that. Like here in Ontario, we've got really strict regulations now around what wines enter Canada because of the tariffs between America and Canada. And so you can just see like the global availability shrinking and shrinking on the wine shelf, where we used to have, more robust Australian and American wines, and now they're just shifting because of those trades. So I was thinking about
Wow.
that because I know you also speak a bit to that, when you're traveling, who's the current president tends to also reflect on like your travel experiences too, right?
Look, I said that. That's good.
Yeah.
Look, look, I wrote the book 3 years ago, right? That wasn't. It was almost like I noticed this when I'm in certain countries,
Hmm.
even from working as a sommelier in Portugal, where if you are in a wine region, a country that's known for making wine, mainly their wine lists are going to be predominantly covered with those wines. But there's few cities in a few areas of the world where you could have like the world is your oyster. Again, New York and the East Coast, I feel like is one of them. But it's also we're now not supporting our local farmers the same way. Again, back to California is doing theirs, or if you're in Oregon, I'm sure I've never been. I'm sure the same way for Oregon winemakers, they get the support of the restaurants where like as if we were in Portugal, 90% of the wine is going to be Portuguese, and then it's going to be some champagne, then it's going to be some Spanish wine, then they'll sprinkle here and there. So I do hope that we get to a point where that is what we're leaning into. I know back in the day, everyone keeps talking about how bad the wine was from upstate New York, too sweet, too this, but that is not the case today.
Yeah.
So I do feel like that no one, if you did do that, then you almost have to be a restaurant or a wine bar that's kind of like, we are a New York, made in New York only wine bar. And I'm like, they don't have to do all that. You literally can just make sure that you are supporting locally. And if there's some varietals or some regions that have something unique that we literally can't get here because of the terroir, feel free to have that as like another, an extension of the wine list, and have that as a section too. But I feel like most of the wines we can get from wines for pairings for a decent wine list we can get here in New York, or even up to Nova Scotia. I've had some amazing sparkling wine from Nova Scotia. Benjamin Bridge is one of my favorite producers there, and I guess I got to do a shout out for Canada. And that's where you base. So
Yeah.
just want to make sure I say that.
Appreciate it. That's really interesting. I'm curious, just in terms of thinking about the idea of heritage protection around terroir too, because you speak a bit to, the history of Champagne and how it's rooted in terroir. And it has this historic protection. And then you've got this really cool example where you're looking at sparkling wines in the Brazilian context. So do you find those heritage protections, are they kind of maintaining those like hierarchies of taste and flavor value, or are they also able to protect different regions of the world as they build up their wine varietals as well?
Yeah, I actually thought you were spot on with recognizing that. Without, I know you don't study or look into wine, but
No.
That tells you the importance of how geographers are to wine. There is someone down at, I'm gonna mess up the school, but she's in Texas. Let me just be safe before I say the wrong university. She's been talking, this particular professor has done some research on, you know, GIS, geography, and studies on how, a wine is being upheld through certain locations. I do think that the answer is yes, in short, to what you're saying. But then how do other wine regions get notoriety, right? So that's the challenge that we're battling with. For instance, if actually let's step outside of wine. I don't want to say Mexico does this in response to what happened in France, but there is the same geography, the designation of tequila, right? Tequila has to come from tequila. I don't
Mm,
know who's making it. Some celebrity, whoever it is, you still gotta fly down to Mexico, make some deals, a know man who know a man to get
yeah.
your agave from the designated areas that you can make tequila. Everywhere else is considered in Mexico, it's considered mezcal, even if it's made the same way as tequila, but not from tequila, it's all called mezcal. Mezcal is more generic. Most people don't know that. It's not just the smoky roasted version that we know. And then agave spirits at large, right? So then we have other agave spirits that they're using the same plant, the agave, and coming up with other things. So it's all not tequila, especially if you are, let's just say, cutting it. They did allow a certain amount of other products to be used to be able to still call it tequila. So that's the debate that's coming up in the spirit industry. But there is, going back to geography, that contribution to, I guess, the world is that everyone knows tequila is a household name no matter where you're at globally. And most people don't even know that it has to come from a town in Mexico, within the Guadalajara region for it to be actually have that name. So the same way it can't be champagne unless it's from the Champagne region of France, it can't be tequila unless it's from Tequila,
Mm,
Mexico, right? So I think it does, in this case, that's the reason why I'm using tequila is that it helps legitimize a region that brown farm workers, brown producers, even brown owned distilleries are, brown people who are actually working in that area. So I feel like it can work in favor of the global market. It created a hierarchy. And if, had to force people who want to make their own tequila, you have to come down here and spend your money with us if you truly want to make a tequila. So that's great. But and on the flip side, we see how the people who've been ahead of the game are the ones who've been doing it for years at this point and created and established their geography as geography hierarchy. Let me just say that.
yeah.
That's probably the easiest way. And so therefore Burgundy, Bordeaux, etc. Like if you don't have these names on your bottle, even within France, there is geography hierarchy because people are not, you brought up Languedoc, for example. A lot of people don't even know or heard of a Languedoc if you're
Yeah.
not in a wine or don't know a wine producer or whoever you had spoke to. I feel like that's different, right? Georgia, which has all of this heritage and history that predates France, but most people don't even know one where Georgia is. You got to tell them it's not the state; it's the country. And I just did a master class for wines of Georgia recently, and so I recognize that even heritage, like if you could even prove, like in their case, we have a wine vessel from 8,000 years, and you would think people go, oh, so they're the true, you know,
Yeah.
let's drink more Georgian wine. But it didn't happen. So geography has truly been a way of claiming hierarchy and legitimacy for the terroir. And we, the sommeliers, we, the wine professionals, we're the ones that are rating, the points on such and such magazine, the critics, the wine critics. We have literally been feeding into this same wine beast, I don't know, the monster of giving legitimacy to them, right? So how do we allow the other regions to actually step up and have its moment and also say that this is great wine coming from these places as well? Mexico has a wine region as well. I think that's important that's our job now, is to truly be able to speak about other regions on a professional level, try them, taste them, and then share them. And in my way, I did that through opening the store as well, because I was like, okay, at the wine shops that I worked at, in the wine shops I go to, they have a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but I thought it was important for me to have wines from Uruguay because they make great wine. sparkling wines from Brazil because they make great bubbles, and most people don't even know Brazil, full wine at all. And then that usually connects people to traveling. A lot of people now, because they love Bordeaux or because they love Burgundy, they now spend the money with flying to these regions. So these are places that people like, okay, you want to go on a wine trip? Won't you fly to Mexico and actually do a wine trip to bring money to that area? And so that's where my connection again with travel and how, first getting the wines in their glass or buy a bottle at home first kind of starts, I believe, the like changing what countries we're now talking about and which ones people are now excited possibly to even visit in the future.
I love that. I think it also speaks to, throughout the book, there's a lot of themes around wine as this like propulsive storyteller, getting at the spices, the ingredients that go into it as well. Can you speak a bit to how you navigate the nuances of wine regions in the world where colonization has had an impact on, what grape varietals are there or what the process may have started out as, even if it's shifted?
Yeah. In my research for the book, I recognize how bringing rootstock and grapevines to a certain location was part of the colonizers' way of kind of showing that we are civil here. Like this place is now civil. So to civilize locals, to civilize, like to create a civilized culture was is the fact that, oh yeah, we're a winemaker. South Africa is what I'm thinking about right now. So even though the Dutch clearly are not known for making wine. So,
Yeah,
but
true.
could they make wine, right? Now that they have, now that they'll colonize a region in the world where wine could be made, that's showing now their pride for their new land. Obviously, it's evident in their architecture, right? So just a way of life, and wine was an important role that they'll bring the vines with them. It doesn't mean they made great wine there, right? It's a lot of stories that has dated about who it really took, in this case, the French Huguenots arriving and then being able to have their knowledge about winemaking there. Same thing when we talk about Brazil, even though the Portuguese were there, there was this time of Italian immigrants really working the land and actually teaching and that spreading that truly made them into a Brazil, like I should say South America, Argentina, etc., that it actually turned these areas into more wine producing countries after the arrival of the I guess the last colonists there. So it was important enough for them to bring it, just like bringing educate their language is another one, right?
Yeah.
People still trip up. Like Brazilians don't speak Brazilian; they speak Portuguese.
Yeah.
So making sure that everyone, or same thing for Spanish, in different countries in South America. I think that was even, we talk about South Africa and its connection with their language to Dutch and English. So wine was used in that same way. Maybe we don't know that or don't realize that. It was brought there for a sense of pride, a sense of ownership of the colonizer. And that's something that I would say is definitely not spoken about in our wine studies, we're learning. So the book it was important for me to make sure that I wanted people to understand at least that connection. Like, how do we trace wine arriving, wine making as a business, as a part of the economy locally? Where does it start? Where does it start, for them? And so that's why I wanted to include it. And that may also inform kind of going back to the type of style culturally that you would find in there too. So yeah, so just want to say that was important for me to include.
I'm glad that you did, because I was also thinking about, you're speaking particularly to like these European grape varieties. And I know I visited out in British Columbia maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, and there was a big movement for wild grapes and incorporating those into wine. Is that representative of that same sort of hierarchy in terms of looking to wild grapes for winemaking, or is that a place where there's more, space for diverse approaches or revitalization of different practices?
And I'm just gonna repeat, you said wild grapes, and if you said that, what do you mean by wild grapes?
So there's like along the BC, I don't know if it's Okanagan or not. I'm forgetting, but there's like a wild grape variety that grows in that area. So it's like a very rough area for things to grow, but those grapevines are not necessarily considered like cultivated grapes to the same extent. So they end up tasting
Okay.
really like earthy.
Yeah, so native grapes that's indigenous to certain areas have often been replanted with more internationally well-known grapes. Some of the work that I did with a winemaker in southern Portugal in the Algarve area, those grapes were being ripped out and are now becoming extinct. And so this winemaker wanted to still include the heritage of his area. He wanted to still use those same grapes. We think it was important, and I agreed to just make sure that the education is given. But that would make his wine harder to sell on a global market if no one's heard of a varietal called Negro Mole, for example, which is from the area. The Portuguese already have a hard time that a lot of people don't know their grapes. They've been secluded from the global wine, let's just say the height of the Western European wines being transported and ending up on wine lists through dictatorship, etc. But there is this revitalization, as you are mentioning, of how do we get people to start, like, I guess, living their own wines? And even here, I would say in Americas, Vitis Lambrusca, which is the DNA of the native varietals to the Americas, like a Concord, for example. That's the easiest one to say. Anybody who knows Welch's grapes,
Oh,
you
yeah,
know
yeah.
Concord.
Yeah.
But if we only see it as Welch's, can we not make wine from the same grape, right? And so there are wineries, winemaker named Todd Cavallo. He's based in Hudson. He's from Syracuse. And I can tell you now that his Concord wine was one of the like fan favorites for the summer that I sold at the store. There's a nostalgia and a sense of palate memory that comes back as well when you taste something that's like, this wine tastes familiar because we know what Concord tastes like versus maybe in Europe,
Right.
they have no idea that, Concord juice by itself would even taste like. But something about Concord, even if you like the jelly, the jam jelly that you would get from Welch's, that we as Americans would actually be more connected to that flavor profile than someone in France. So, and the wine he made actually wasn't, I don't believe it was sweet. I think it was fruity, very fruit forward, like a juicy Cabernet. But Concord probably, talk about hierarchy of terroir. I think that varietals, if they're not international, then it's almost, is it even good? I mean, so I'm like, this is
Right.
a renowned winemaker. He makes all types of wine. Concord just happened to be one of them. So you think he would make a bad wine? He's gonna put the same love and care that he do his Chardonnay. He would to what he would do for his Concord. So I feel like that's the revitalization example I guess I can show, is that the winemakers who are using even today hybrid grapes are more climate resistant. So it may be a hybrid of something that has a Vitis Lambrusca DNA, native to the US, to Americas, and then also Vitis vinifera, which is the DNA of the Pinot Noirs of the world that's from Europe. And so a hybrid grape would have kind of like the hardiness. It will grow. It could do well with cool climate, maybe more pressure, disease resistant. And so the planting of maybe these varieties that people, example of one is Cayuga White, named after Cayuga, the lake, one of the Finger Lakes in New York. And it was developed and named, I believe, officially at Cornell University. And now there are more plantings of it. And now it has a designation instead of being called, like, I don't know,
Uh,
Y183. It now has an
right.
official name. It's now has been adapted into the lexicon of, for wine, and has now the varietal can be used in place. People can purchase it and obviously make wine in other places. Who knows how well it would do in Northern California, for example, or even somewhere near, Oregon. And it may be a hardy grape that could do well in those other areas. But time would only tell if one, it gets adapted, if we could get people to like appreciate it as much as we do as professionals. I would say it's probably closest to like a Sauvignon Blanc style. If somebody wanted to know, like, oh, what can I expect with the Cayuga White flavor profile? Or it maybe it
Uh,
tastes like a blend of like Riesling and Sauvignon Blanc together. That would be my um
cool.
best way of describing that one for anybody who's interested in doing some research to find to taste them. So there is a lot of this hierarchy that's happening, but I do have hope. Those two wineries, for example, the one in Portugal, and sticking up for his traditional varietals still being made at his winery. I hope there are more people who are not replanting just the big names that everybody know, because that's how we get folks to know more about each one of these countries and cultures too. So
Totally, totally. I'm wondering, this book really feels like this beginning and like a very momentum filled beginning of a change in terms of perspective around what constitutes wine pairings and how we think about that more broadly. What sorts of research and reflections, you spoke a bit about it, but what do you think is needed in order to maintain this shift in wine going forward?
whoa, that's a big question. We'll try not to be long winded on this, but I hope that the book is an it's kind of one of those outreach, like, "Hi, everybody. First, we have a problem. We shouldn't
Yeah.
include," like, there's, like, a sense of awareness I wanted to have with this book. And even the wine professionals who blurbs are on the back, etcetera, a lot of them even said, "Yeah, like, why have we not been talking about these pairings in this way?"
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of
Yeah.
like, we eat this food every day. We're not all eating fine dining at, like you said, haute cuisine every day. So why are we not talking about our everyday foods with wine? So maybe awareness. Professionals, we're the ones who deem wine critics, wine writers, we're the ones who are out here deeming which wines are the holy grail and what regions are uplifted. So I would say the same thing for pairings too. So maybe more restaurants thinking about wine as a proper pairing, for their cuisine is instead of just the beer at the barbecue joints, like you said for your example. So there is the powers that be, the restaurateurs, the chefs that's out there to actually see that it's important, even if it's just five wines, but let's be more strategic and intentional. I feel like just like your food is telling a story, your beverage list should also, add to that storytelling. And that's the way we get these wines in people, thinking about a pairing in this way. Everyone doesn't have to be a som if you're at the barbecue space, but you get someone to work with who could be able to help you think more intentionally about the wines. You have those selected, and then these are the ones we're going to work with. Let's try to keep something, a couple of whites, couple of reds, some rosé, and I feel like that's good for the clientele to be able to understand and see that, oh wow, they were intentional about this list. And maybe I should be intentional about my barbecue or my jerk chicken, when I'm having it at home, whether I'm cooking it, hence the recipes that's in it in the book. Cause I didn't know, wherever people live, if they were excited about that, they could also find recipes like, oh, I can't find jerk chicken where I live, or I can't find, like, oh, here's someone's recipe for making these dishes at home, even if you lived in an area that may not be as diverse as New York City, right? Which is where I base it, have access. I feel like that's also important, whether it's in your house, hey, here's my suggestions for some wines for you to try out. And then also the powers that be, I guess you call us the gatekeepers, right? The ones who are creating the wine list, the ones who own the restaurants, for them just to be more intentional about having good wines that make sense for the culture or the mission of your restaurant. Let's think more, let's have like a more curated experience with our beverages instead of just kind of hitting like, oh, okay, everyone's just
Yeah.
going to want a beer, everyone's going to want an ale, everyone's going to want this. Let's actually like create an experience for them as well. So I feel like that's hopefully
Thanks.
that call to action for all of us to be able to do in regards to wine pairings, both the professional and at home, the at home cook too.
I love that. Yeah, it's such an inspiring book for that. It really encourages like your considerations to bloom. So thank you so very much for putting it out. Thank you so much for talking with me about it. Do you mind sharing where people can find you online if they want to learn more and check out your book?
Yes. So if you go to my website, all the information there, as well as links to small independent bookstores that has been supporting me on my journey. The book dropped November 4th. So I would really appreciate that, as well as other links. It is sold in Barnes and Nobles and Amazon, but the small bookshops is, we're gonna be trying to help keep them alive as well. So
Yes,
my
big
name,
time.
so it's Cha McCoy, CHAMCCOY.com is where you'll find that. And on Instagram is where I spend most of my time, and LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn.
Oh, yeah.
CHA_squared, SQUARED on Instagram, and my name, Cha McCoy, on LinkedIn. Please interact with me. Tell me if you're loving the book. Tag me in your favorite pairing if you're making it at home. And yeah, look forward to connecting beyond this episode.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Cha.
Thank you.
That was Cha McCoy. I've linked her book, Wine Pairing for the People, as well as her social media in the show notes below if you want to follow along and learn more. You can also find all this at our website at anthropdish.com under episodes. Thanks so much for listening to Anthropdish Podcast. Subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like the show, please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help get the word out. For more Anthropdish, you can sign up for my newsletter at sarahdougnan.substack.com or find me on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, or Blue Sky at Anthropdish Podcast. I always love hearing from you and what you're thinking about food. Music production was done by Lucas Wojcicki at lucassound.com. Anthropdish is produced in partnership with the American Anthropological Association. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week.